Somebody like Scott Galloway, the professor from NYU, will tell you that suicide rates are up, suicide ideation is up, depression is up for white males. And he would also tell you that if you walked onto a college campus, there are more women's advocacy groups, women for this, women for that. And there's very few for white males. Now, Galloway pointed out on television that in the statements and policy initiatives from Harris, lots of groups are included, but not white males. They're conspicuously absent, yet they represent at least 25% of the potential people that are going to go vote for her. So I'm wondering, and I'd like you to react to this, I'm wondering if we have overdone things. And I'm wondering if we have to figure out a way to get the pendulum back to somewhere in the middle where people are at least treated fairly and equally and not one overly advantaged over the other, because these are individuals, Katty. These are human beings. It's creating self-esteem issues. The policy redirect or the policy overcorrection, if you will. And again, I'm not saying it isn't justified and I'm not saying it isn't true, but I'm just wondering if the answer is to go in the direction that we're going. I wonder if there's a better policy response and better narrative for Harris.
Yeah, and she's brought on Tim Walz to try and win those voters. Clearly, he appeals directly to those voters. I wrote about this a lot in the book I put out last year, The Power Code.
The Power Code, and Confidence Code and Power Code, yep.
Looking at what the role of men and women is and how power is shifting from men to women. I mean, the numbers do still support the idea that there is more struggle for women to get to the top. Only 12% of CEOs are women, 20% of senators are women, less than half of members of Congress are women. So at the top levels, women are still not represented in the numbers that men are represented. And I think a lot of women would point to that and say, we've still got work to do. There is still discrimination or systems in place that make it hard for us to get to the top. I'm also aware that almost half of men ages 18 to 29, so this Gen Z group, think that there is discrimination against men in American society. But I think Tim Walz actually, wittingly or unwittingly, echoes a lot of what I write about in my book, which is not that there needs to be discrimination against men. And actually the best companies I know that have done big DEI efforts have also included efforts to include straight white men. And how does it feel to be a straight white man and what can be done to help them? But I think what Tim Walz is doing is presenting an alternative view of masculinity, where you can be the football coach and you can be the governor of your state and you can be the Army Reserve officer, but you can also love your kids and show emotion towards your kids, and be there for the boys and girls in your life. And I think that view of masculinity... What about hair products and self-tanning? Is that okay too for men? Or no, I'm just wondering. Like tanning, self-tanning lotions and creams? Or a lot of men
Botox,
aged 18 to 29 who feel that orange hair and orange skin is the look that they would like to have. There is a pollster, Christine Matthews, who's described the Trump's Vance ticket as the testosterone ticket, that they've just gone, full on Trump Vance with his view of how life should have been in the 1950s somehow for men and women is an echo to that idea of men aren't allowed to be men anymore. Men used to be the breadwinners. They used to be, their grandfathers were the breadwinners. And now, damn it, their wives are anymore. And part of me has not a massive amount of sympathy for that, because after centuries of having been, I think it would be hard to argue that men, and white men in particular, had not had privilege from the virtue of their birth for centuries. There may be a little bit of over recalibration, but I would say that if I saw the number, if you said to me, 70% of world leaders are women and 60% of CEOs are women and 80% of members of Congress and senators are women, I'd say, okay, yeah, we've overcorrected. But it's not the case. And I realize that for individuals, that's hard. And I think the way to tackle this is not to think, well, women don't need more support to get into those positions, but it's to think, actually, we need to have a think about what manhood looks like and keep the sports playing, keep the football, keep the coach, keep the Army Reserve, but as well have a kind of an ability to care for and nurture members of your family, which actually would help everybody, because if men were more involved in housework and in caregiving, of course, women could do better too. But I think it would enrich men's lives as well. And I think that's the kind of slightly subtle, nuanced thing that Tim Walz represents. And we saw a lot of it with Doug Emhoff at the DNC, Doug Emhoff's speech, was that role of a man who is supporting his wife, who's been a very successful lawyer, but stepped down to support his wife. Not an easy thing to do. I don't know that changes the minds of 18 to 29-year-olds. Maybe they want what, Vance is offering, a 1950s view of what it is to be a man. But I think it's a new view of what masculinity could look like. And if it was sold well, I think certainly appeals to women, which may account for why the female gap has grown so much. But I think it has the potential of appealing to some men too.
Well, listen, I would say that Trump wins this demographic if we make it about these testosterone-like issues. No one's asked me this, but I'll say it here. If I landed from Mars and I witnessed the DNC, I would have said, okay, America is 70% black and 80% women. That's what I would have said. And I get it. I understand what you're doing. I understand the base that you're trying to go after. I understand the healing that has to take place and the need for overcorrection. But I don't want to leave people out. She's got to fortify that and maybe get Governor Walz out there or other surrogates out there to explain that it may be more macho to vote for her. Maybe she represents something that's actually more steely than Mr. Pushover. And whether they like it or not, 40% of the American voting population is white male. It's not the majority anymore, but it's a very relevant voting bloc, and they've got to focus on it.
I have another question for you, because the other thing that's happening here is that, and this is true not just in the United States, it's true in Europe as well. It's probably true where you are in Australia, I imagine. Young women are becoming more liberal and young men are becoming more conservative. We've looked at the kind of young men and why they might be feeling a little bit that they want to push back against some of the more kind of inclusion efforts that have focused on women and minorities. Why do you think young women are becoming more liberal?
I think it has to do with the reproductive freedom. I also think it's a reaction to the misogyny. I think that one woman tonight, I was at a dinner, I was the guest speaker, and one woman looked over at me and said, when Donald Trump won, I'm an Australian citizen, but I said, oh, wow, there's just so much space for this like misogyny. And it's 8 years since that electoral success for Mr. Trump, and he's posting misogynistic tweets about Vice President Harris and about Secretary Clinton. And then one of his supporters said to me, well, he didn't write that tweet. Okay, but he reposted it. So therefore, he's claiming authorship on his site by reposting it. It's now becoming something that he's sanctioning and sponsoring. So to me, if I'm a woman that's concerned about my reproductive freedoms, and I'm a woman that's concerned about my ascension in the world in terms of what my aspirations are, both professionally and domestically, of course I'm going to be more liberal. How could I not be more liberal? And if a man is feeling that he's being weakened by being neglected by the liberals, I don't know, does Bill Clinton in his heyday have less testosterone than Donald Trump? I mean, come on, give me a break. And so the answer is you've got to recognize that your party, the party that looks like the beautiful, colorful mosaic of America and reflects into the needs and interests of that mosaic, is going to do better. Mr. Trump focuses on the white population more than any other. He tries to pretend that he doesn't, but that's what he does. And he thinks that's going to be his base that carries him to the presidency. Vice President Harris has to do something different. She needs that kaleidoscope of people. And a good portion of those people, looking at the demographics, are white men. And so bring Scott Galloway into your campaign for a day, hear him out, listen to some of his suggestions, and incorporate it into your campaign and let people know that you're there to be their advocate. And I think it's something that you can see in the data, Katty. Something that their lack of doing that is being reflected in the data. Yeah.
And I look, they're going to need to win over. They must be loving the fact that so many young women are excited by her candidacy, but they can't keep losing young men at the rate that they are.